likes the limelight and courts the public attention.
I think you'll still get plenty of limelight, by the way.
Do you think so, from the backbench?
Well, I think so. I mean, people do go to the backbench, they're well known, and their contribution is recognised, but as they contribute on an ongoing basis to policy ideas for the progressive side of politics, that's a good thing. And as I'm indicating, in the 21st century, for progressive parties right around the world, the development of a very modern political policy agenda is vital. And Julia Gillard has been doing that, and she's been implementing those policies and navigating them through the parliament. But again, those efforts have been crowded out in the public arena because of this issue, which we now put behind us.
Polling shows that Kevin Rudd is almost twice as popular as Julia Gillard. Julia Gillard is clearly not connecting with the public. Does she have something to learn, do you think, from Kevin Rudd? And should she be seeking his counsel on how to improve her public standing?
Well, I think if I were doing media every day in an environment where there are newspaper stories every second day at least about the possibility, indeed the imminence of a leadership challenge, your mind does go to that. With that out of the way, with our big reforms that we thought and said we would do in the first half of the parliamentary term.
But my question was, do you think she should be seeking counsel from Kevin Rudd on how to improve her popularity with the public?
Yeah, I'm simply saying that these are big reforms, not very popular reforms, and now the task of explaining the benefits is before us. But that burden of the leadership speculation is lifted off Julia's shoulders, and we will work harder. Julia will work harder in explaining those benefits. And incidentally, I'm not going to go into a heavily partisan thing, the onus will shift onto Tony Abbott after the 1st of July in explaining why he would repeal the carbon tax, why he would repeal the mining tax. These are big Labor reforms, and then he's got to explain that. And I'm certainly looking forward to that, because I don't think he'll have any plausible explanation for either.
Now, Assistant Treasurer Mark Abib resigned today.
Yeah.
By way of explanation, he said it was to help heal the party. How will Mark Abib's resignation heal the party?
I don't personally think it'll have a big impact. What I think really motivated Mark, and I did not have prior knowledge of this, but you can read someone's face in an interview, it was a heartfelt explanation of the fact that he's a dad with little kids and they miss him.
But he's only 40, he's hardly going to retire, is he?
No, no one's suggesting that you retire when you finish politics. God help us if all politicians who lose their seats are expected to retire, or who, in Mark's case, relinquish their seats. But I do ask people to understand that as dads and as mums, we know every day that we're in politics we are not being as good a dad or a mum as we could be, and
but
I think that's what affected Mark.
He specifically said,
I know
by way of explanation, that it was to heal the party.
I know that. And
what I'm asking you is, in what way does his resignation help heal the wounds within the Labor Party?
Well, as I say, I don't think that's a big deal. That's
well,
my opinion.
He made it a big deal.
Okay, but I just say, and so what am I supposed to say? Get the lines out of some sort of script. I'm giving you an honest answer. You asked an honest question. Mark thinks it will. I don't think it's a big deal. I think actually what more motivated Mark, looking at his face, looking at his body, him being a dad just like I am, there's mums here who've had babies here and their little kids are crying on the phone to them saying, "Mummy, please come home." Now, I reckon that's been a prime motivation in what Mark's done. In terms of directly answering your question, I think he was regarded as one of the factional organisers, so to speak. Maybe there was some marginal benefit there. I don't put a high weighting on that. This caucus ballot was conducted in a way where people from the different factions, whether it's the hard left, the soft left, the hard right, the soft left, the extreme centre, the moderates, all of those, there was no factional basis for the way that people made their decisions, and I think that is overstated. Yes, in the media, and also Kevin was talking about the faceless men. Mark Abib's got a face, Bill Shorten's got a face. They're actually quite well known, but the fact is, when people cast their vote, and in that caucus ballot today, they made a judgment as to who they think could best lead the Labor Party, and it wasn't a celebrity contest. It was a contest about who could develop and implement and navigate through the Parliament Labor policies.
And just very quickly, do you expect there to be more bloodletting in the reshuffle that will now ensue?
Look,
people who were supportive of Kevin Rudd?
I am quite sure that the fact that frontbenchers supported Kevin Rudd does not in any way disqualify or prejudice their position on the front bench, and there's a real practical example of that we've already seen played out. Anthony Albanese ringing Julia Gillard saying, I am going to vote against you. I think on that basis I need to offer my resignation. Julia Gillard said, thank you for your candour and your offer is rejected. We want you, because you're a good Labor man, a good person with great values, to continue to serve on my front bench.
Dr. Emerson, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma.
With all the blinding distractions of the leadership battle, will today's caucus vote let the government get back to the business of governing? For a business take on Labor's bloodletting, I spoke a short time ago to Paul Espie, founder of the Pacific Road Group and chairman of the Australian Infrastructure Fund. Paul Espie, thanks very much for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
Now, you're a veteran of the mining industry with background in banking and infrastructure. Is the business community convinced when Julia Gillard says that the government today is back on track?
Business people come from various directions on the big issues of the day. I can state the obvious and say that the one thing business people have which is consistent, is that they want to see stability, they want to see rational development of policy and the implementation of it. I would argue that, broadly speaking, what's led up to the events of the last week doesn't meet that test terribly well.
And so the federal election isn't due until around the end of next year. Will that be long enough for Labor to prove that it has got its house back in order, or do we need an early election?
I'm not a political commentator, so and I'm not particularly familiar with the inner workings of the Labor Party. All I can say is that we've got a situation in this country at the moment where a minority government, a function of which can be successful in some countries, has not worked particularly well here. And I'd go so far as to say that it's because the tail has been wagging the dog. I can't see why that's going to change as a result of the events of the last week and today.
Is it something about Julia Gillard's leadership that concerns you?
I think there are rather higher level issues, frankly. Going back to the first announcement of the carbon tax, the first announcement of National Broadband Network, the early parliamentary announcements of that, and the general running up of debt that has been something we've lived with through the last 2 to 5 years. Those things are of major concern to the extent that they are done on the run. And I can tell you that internationally, a sequence of the things that have happened in our country through that period has made the rest of the world ask the question, what's going on in Australia?
So do you think it has damaged Australia's reputation overseas?
There's no doubt that the perception of Australia as a stable, well-managed country has come under some real threat. I was in the United States in my business talking to institutional investors at the time that Julia Gillard acceded to the leadership of the Labor Party and the Prime Ministership. It came as a real shock to the Americans. Some of the tax and other initiatives and the running down of the credit balances of the country and the debt that's gone with it have really made the rest of the world wonder. Here we are, the lucky country in many respects. We're enjoying much better economic health, but it's being run down.
Well, there are many in the business community who are calling for an early election. Are you among them?
We have a system of government. We do rely on the confidence of the public. The confidence of the public, I think, has been given a bit of a run this last week. That is to say, the public are asked, and we as a country, thank God, we accept the results of an election, and we expect a government to have the power to get on, formulate good policy and administer it. That has not been the way of things in the last while, and as I said, to the extent that the tail wags the dog in Parliament in Australia presently, I can't see that being solved. So, do I think there should be an election? I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference what happens in the next 12 months. I think we've in prior times seen opposition pressing for elections a bit ahead of their own interest and the stability in the country. My personal inclination, though I'd like to see the issue of government with authority resolved, would be to perhaps let it run its course, which doesn't necessarily mean run to the end of the term of the current Parliament.
So what does it mean?
It means that, that's a very good question. It means what comes of the position that the independents have taken, the tail wagging the dog, as I call it, and of course it's not just what happens in the House of Representatives, but it's what happens in the Senate. How do those powermongers resolve their role relative to the Prime Minister and her cabinet?
So you think the question of the leadership of the Labor Party is far from settled?
Well, I think the authority of the leadership has been seriously questioned, and it hasn't suddenly been put to bed today.
Now, there's a lot of talk in the business community about the lack of productivity growth in Australia. To what extent do you believe the Labor government's workplace reforms are to blame?
I reflect back in the times when I was involved in some of the bigger mining projects and their financing, to the time when Charles Copeman set about putting Robe River back on sound footing. And at that time, the relationships between the companies, their management, and the workforce in the Pilbara was pretty diabolical. In subsequent years, enterprise bargaining and the rights of the individuals at work to strike their own deals with their employers brought about spectacular improvements in productivity. And we've been living on the fruits of that